Hello and welcome to Inside Judicial Watch. I'm your host, Bruce Schlesman. Today we're going to be talking about 2018 and the year in review of our top 5 cases. With me to discuss that topic, we have our senior investigator, Bill Marshall. Thanks so much for joining us today, Bill.
Oh, thanks for having me back, Bruce. It's great to be here.
Of course. I'd like to start by talking about George Soros and the USAID and State Department scandal. I'd like to start with that case. Would you mind briefing us a little bit on how that went?
Sure. But I'd just like to step back because there are so many cases, really, that Judicial Watch is working on, that I'm working on, that our other investigators are working on. And we have so much litigation in progress right now. In fact, I think we have a bigger caseload right now, litigation, than we've probably ever had.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and 2018 was really a banner year for us, and by extension for the American people in terms of our holding the government to account and exposing the corruption and criminality in the government, particularly what we've seen in the last 3 years with respect to the Trump so-called collusion investigation and the burying of the Hillary Clinton email server investigation. But yeah, so we can just hit maybe a few topics today. But one of the ones that I think is very important that we've really put a lot of effort into in 2018 was looking at George Soros' collaboration with the U.S. State Department and looking at how much money, U.S. taxpayer money, is going to, via the State Department and USAID, is going to George Soros organizations throughout the world. These are so-called nonprofit, non-governmental organizations that are operating in literally dozens of countries. And in virtually all of them, these organizations are radical, leftist, socialist-minded organizations, sort of the New World Order kind of one world in their mentality. And we've done several stories. We did several stories last year exposing what we were finding with respect to money, USAID money, going to Soros organizations in Romania and Albania and Macedonia. We have other cases, other countries that we're looking at his operations in, for example, Poland, Guatemala, Colombia, and we'll be looking at more in 2019. It's really a truly scandalous issue and one that should be exposed because Soros's operatives in many of these countries are literally meeting with the State Department officials at our embassies and advising the State Department on where U.S. tax dollars in the form of USAID grants should go. For example, in Albania, our research uncovered that the head of Open Society Foundation Albania, which is Open Society Foundation, sort of the umbrella organization founded and funded by George Soros, a hugely well-endowed organization with billions of dollars in assets. This individual, Andy DeBrushi, who heads OSF Albania, the Soros operation Albania, was meeting with the U.S. ambassador in Albania, then Donald Liu, this is going back a couple of years, and giving advice and input to the State Department and USAID on which nonprofit organizations in Albania that U.S. grants should be directed. Now, the thing about, as I said, about Soros's organizations, they are almost invariably promoting a radical leftist agenda. I'm talking about abortion, expanding abortion rights, expanding same-sex marriage, socialist economic policies, open borders, mass migration across borders. They tend to try to energize young people to commit violence and to assault police, throw rocks at police, to commit arson and this sort of thing. It's the black mass kind of movement. This is what Soros is promoting in countries around the world, and with the aid of U.S. taxpayer dollars. This is a story that really needs to be exposed and requires a lot more investigation.
So just for clarification, these movements or these people that are advising on behalf of Soros are telling the U.S. State Department to invest in partisan groups benefiting their organization, not just like general advisement about where to invest, correct?
Yeah, yes, and they're advising the State Department to direct funds into radical leftist organizations which have an ideologically socialist bent,
Okay.
sort of a one world bent.
Yeah.
This is not. They're essentially promoting organizations that are anti-American and that are very left wing in their outlook.
Is this still going on right now, even under the Trump State Department, now that Obama's gone?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, Donald Liu, shockingly, was recently, who was a close George Soros associate, was just appointed by the Trump administration to be the new and confirmed by the Senate to be the new ambassador to Kyrgyzstan. So, this is the thing that troubles me the most, is that despite President Trump coming in and Mike Pompeo taking over as Secretary of State, you're seeing this sort of leftist bent and anti-American bent within the State Department, if you will. This tendency to support movements overseas that are very anti-American in nature. Yeah.
So would you mind elaborating a little bit? You've mentioned a few countries in this stuff about some of these worst offenses that we're investigating in, like in specifics.
Right. Well, in Macedonia, for example, the State Department gave, I believe, it was nearly $5 million to what they call, a civil. It's under the guise of a civil society project. They're giving money to Soros organizations. It's this sort of, they have a small grant program in Albania where, people apply for grant money on up to, maybe $20,000, which may not seem like a lot, but when you multiply that many times, it begins to add up. And why we should be giving a dime to any organization that is anti-American in its outlook and is espousing anarchic socialist policies is really baffling to me. It's something that has to be addressed. And what the Soros organizations tend to do, they claim that they are well, civil society is one of the watch phrases, if you will, that they always push. But in reality, it's not civil society at all that they're advocating. They're advocating leftist society. And another phrase that they like to throw out is judicial reform. They'll go into countries, for example, in Colombia, another country where we're taking a close look, and we're getting records, by the way, out of the State Department related to its funding of operations in Colombia right now. They push for so-called judicial reform, and they claim that they're cleaning up corruption. But in reality, what they're doing is they're replacing conservative jurists in these countries with leftist judges who will support the radical leftist agendas of these various movements in these countries. So that's something this so-called judicial reform movement is not really judicial reform at all, but it's part of the playbook. It's part of the Soros playbook in these countries.
So a lot of these countries you've named have a massive corruption problem. Do you think these open societies are contributing to the systemic corruption in, for example, Colombia, Guatemala, like Albania has a lot of internal corruption?
Absolutely. The president of Albania is a guy named Edi Rama. He is a proto-communist. Before the fall of the Soviet Union, his father had been a member of the Albanian Politburo, the Communist Party. He was a very prominent politician himself. And Edi Rama is now a socialist, but essentially pursuing the same communist type policies that preceded the fall of the Soviet Union. And the level of corruption in Albania, and I get this from very, very good high-level sources in Albania, the level of corruption has soared, has skyrocketed. Albania has now become, under the Rama regime, who is a close friend of George Soros, has become the hotbed or the locus of cannabis production, sale and production in Europe. Cannabis production has increased something like 300%, and it is now the sort of the focus of all cannabis sales in Europe. So what we're hearing, and this is not just anecdotal. This is also based. If you look at transparency indices, you'll see that Albania has descended in terms of its level, in terms of its level of corruption. That is to say, corruption has skyrocketed under the regime of Eddie Rama, of the George Soros-backed Eddie Rama.
And with your other cases, moving on to the Peter Strzok and Lisa Page relationship, you did a lot of work, a lot of the legwork in that case and how that developed. Do you mind taking us a little bit into that?
Sure. That's an ongoing saga. Of course, to back up a little bit, as we all know, it's a very somewhat complex story, but in essence, it's very simple. The Obama administration committed what I think is one of the most grievous crimes in the history of the United States, political or otherwise. Far worse than Watergate, worse than the betrayal by Benedict Arnold. The Obama administration weaponized the intelligence and law enforcement apparatus of our country to target the opposition presidential candidate, Donald Trump, to take him out, while at the same time burying the crimes of his opponent in the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton. By crimes, I mean her egregious abuse of national security information laws, that is, laws governing the handling of top secret information, as well as the rampant pay-for-play corruption at the Clinton Foundation while she was Secretary of State. So, central to burying the Hillary Clinton investigation, the FBI's investigation of her server, while at the same time trying to undermine the candidacy of Donald Trump, were two senior FBI officials. One was a special counsel to Deputy Director of Andrew McCabe, and her name was Lisa Page. And the other official at the heart of this conspiracy was a man named Peter Strzok, who was a senior agent in the counter-espionage section of the FBI. And they also happened to be lovers. And thanks to their romantic relationship, they texted constantly and they emailed constantly. Something like 50,000 text messages, I think, have now been released by the FBI. And what we got uniquely through my investigation and our litigation were an additional 13,000 emails that they've exchanged. Now, so far, we've only received about, I would say, 3,000 to 4,000 of those emails. Every month, we get another production. In every production, there's new information revealed about all kinds of issues and problems at the FBI. One, for example, which was pretty startling to me as a former federal law enforcement agency official, was the use of unsecure electronic devices to communicate highly sensitive information by the top officials in the FBI, DOJ, and NSA. They were literally using unsecured mobile devices and, in one case, a Yahoo email account to discuss a highly classified, or highly sensitive, I should say, not necessarily classified, but a highly sensitive information sharing, data sharing agreement between the European Union and the United States. Even Peter Strzok, in his communications with Lisa Page, implored her to tell her bosses to stop using the Yahoo account and these electronic devices, because, for example, Yahoo was compromised in 2013 with 1 billion of its accounts hacked. So, do you really want one of the top officials in the NSA to be discussing a very sensitive data sharing agreement, ironically, on a very hackable, Yahoo account? I mean, this is just almost shocking information is being revealed and dribbled out, and exposed in these email exchanges. So I have to, in a way, you almost have to thank Peter Strzok and Lisa Page for being so voluble in their communications, because it's almost like the Rosetta Stone. We're learning so much about the corruption, about the corruption with the burying of the Hillary email server case, which was called Mid-Year Exam. That was the name of the operation within the FBI, as well as Operation Crossfire Hurricane, which was this phony, falsely predicated counterintelligence investigation operation to take out Donald Trump through the use of fabricated intelligence, which was salted into the national security establishment and used as the predication for mounting an investigation of the Trump campaign, this so-called collusion with Russia, which was completely fabricated by by the Obama administration, and then now by extension through the Mueller investigation in order to, ultimately in their minds impeach the president.
And Peter Strzok was part of both the Hillary Clinton investigation
Yes.
And the Mueller probe.
Yes, as was Lisa Page. They were like Zelig, or Forrest Gump. They show up everywhere. In fact, Peter Strzok was one of the agents who actually interviewed Hillary Clinton in her infamous, the deposition that she gave as part of the conclusion of the mid-year exam investigation. Yeah. He also, he was involved. What really comes through in all of these email exchanges is how integral Peter Strzok was to every aspect of both of these scandals, both of these truly, shocking examples of government corruption and corruption by the deep state and the Obama administration. You have, in essence, I would guesstimate just from public reporting, 100 to 200 people who were involved in this conspiracy that reached across the Obama administration at the highest levels of the CIA, NSA, FBI, DOJ, State Department, and all of them should, in my view, be indicted and prosecuted.
So you also were part of the Bill Clinton, Loretta Lynch tarmac meeting and that investigation. Man, you did a lot in 2018, but would you mind taking us a little bit into that?
Yeah, the Obama administration really gave us a lot of fodder. It's such a target-rich environment. We don't even really have enough resources, which is why our donors are so important to our operations, in order to keep all of these things in the air, all these balls in the air. You'll recall in June 27th of 2016, Bill Clinton met on a tarmac at Sky Harbor International Airport in Phoenix, Arizona, with then Attorney General Loretta Lynch. Now, this was a highly inappropriate meeting because right at that moment, the FBI was investigating Bill Clinton's wife for her abuse of of national security information in the mid-year exam investigation. And Bill Clinton himself may have been under investigation at that time. We're not really sure, but I believe that the FBI was at that time investigating the Clinton Foundation based on some other email traffic we've seen over pay-for-play corruption, right? So here you have an individual, Bill Clinton, whose wife is currently under investigation by the feds, and who himself may have been under investigation, getting a meeting with the Attorney General, who is nominally in charge of both those investigations. That's absolutely outrageous. Loretta Lynch should never have allowed that meeting to occur on that tarmac. Supposedly it happened, it was by happenstance. They happened to run into each other on the tarmac of an airport. I mean, it's ludicrous on its face. But
an airport in Phoenix too.
Yeah, very hot. I imagine very hot airport in June. Now I sort of, we blanketed that issue with FOIA records requests to not only the DOJ and FBI, as well as NSA. I saw transcripts of the meeting. We went through various routes to try to get transcripts of their conversation. I also went after records from the airport authority in Phoenix to get technical information to see how long they were aware that this meeting was going to take place, and all kinds of records like that. One of the most interesting revelations that came out of that was that the FBI essentially lied to us, or they provided false information in a lawsuit. Because one of the requests that we had made to the FBI was for any records relating to that tarmac meeting. They came back and said to us that they had no records related to the tarmac meeting. Well then, and we agreed, I believe we agreed to dismiss the case when they told us that. But then in the course of another investigation we were doing, where we sought what are called 302s, these are FBI interview summary forms, about another case, we got records showing them discussing the tarmac meeting. So essentially, in one case, they denied having any records at all about the tarmac meeting, and then in another unrelated case, they produced these records showing that in fact they were discussing internally, the FBI was discussing the meeting on the tarmac. And in a very interesting exchange, one FBI official tells another one, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but she said, our main mission is to avoid embarrassing the boss, meaning presumably James Comey, the director of the FBI, in discussing this tarmac meeting. And then, I think it was Peter Strzok said in one of these emails that that the tarmac meeting was only going to sort of further the whole, conservative narrative that there was a lot of collusion going on, among the DOJ and with the Clinton campaign and this sort of thing. So clearly there were discussions going on at the FBI, and yet in another case they told us they had no record. So that was a very interesting sort of revelation of the FBI, either consciously or not, falsely stating in a court filing that they had no records to provide to us.
It's kind of ridiculous that we're still going over what happened in 2015, 2016, and even earlier with these things. But,
Well, one of the reasons for that is that it takes the government so long to respond, and they fight us tooth and nail, especially when it comes to anything embarrassing. So we have to litigate. Litigation takes time. It's expensive. It's very laborious. So we're constantly going back and forth. And then when they do produce records, they do so deliberately at a glacial pace. They'll provide us with, they'll claim they can only process 500 pages a month, which is pretty minimal. But that the courts have generally agreed that that's what the government can be held to, producing 500 pages a month. So.
And you were also part of the FISA application warrants related to Carter Page. This July, correct?
Yes, we have many records requests out relating to the FISA warrants. Now, this again is one of the most seminal issues in the whole scandal surrounding the 2016 presidential campaign. Was this effort to get monitoring, wiretaps essentially, or email monitoring powers on the Trump campaign by the Obama administration. That is to say, they used a patsy, essentially, Carter Page, who was a low-level, virtually invisible, Trump campaign official, and therefore a perfect target. They concocted this very flimsy evidence or evidence that he was a Russian agent. Because that's what you would need in order to get a FISA warrant to spy on an American citizen. A FISA warrant's a very big deal. You have to go, the FBI has to go before the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court and make a very, very convincing argument that an American citizen is acting as a foreign agent in order to use a very intrusive warrant to spy on that individual's communications. Because there's no adversary in the process. That is to say, a FISA court judge is entirely reliant on the representations being made by the FBI and that they're being truthful. Because there's nobody acting on behalf of the person to be spied upon to counter the FBI's assertions, right? So the court is very strict with the FBI. They say you have to provide us with information that you know to be truthful and has been verified. There's something called the Woods procedure, which is supposed to ensure this. It's a very big deal, and it opens up the FISA process is something that could be really abused by a tyrant, by a tyrannical president. And I would argue that that's exactly what Barack Obama was. Many people would be shocked by that, maybe, and certainly his supporters would be. But if you look at the totality of evidence that's come out about the efforts to bury the FBI investigation into Hillary Clinton's server and the efforts to undermine Donald Trump, those are the actions of a tyrant. And I would stand by that. It was such an egregious abuse of our laws and our technological resources and our law enforcement and intelligence agencies that they engaged in.
To go after Carter Page specifically.
To go after Carter Page, to go after George Papadopoulos, to go after, frankly, Michael Flynn. some you can argue that some of his dealings with Turkey and related to his acting as an agent for a foreign power before he was named National Security Advisor. That's somewhat up in the air, but to do what they did, to use an unverified, salacious document like the Steele dossier, which was paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign, to use that as the basis for a FISA warrant to surveil an official in the opposition party's presidential campaign is incredible. It's truly outrageous. I mean, it had what they call two-hop authority, which meant that the FBI could look at the communications that Carter Page was having with other people, and then they could look at the communications that those people were having with other people. So they could have surveilled the entire Trump campaign, the communications, which is just unbelievable. It's third world.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. Yeah. So, lastly, with the major investigation that maybe got glossed over a lot by the media and such, was the release of information about UACs, unaccompanied alien children, I believe is the acronym. You did a lot of research in uncovering kind of their treatment in detention centers, what those detention centers were like, the mistreatment by U.S. officials, and then also just the kinds of people that were involved in kind of coming over with some MS-13 gangbangers slipping through and that sort of thing.
Right. I actually started looking at that issue intensely in 2014 when we were seeing waves of unaccompanied alien children, these UACs, coming across the border, and the Obama administration, frankly, encouraging it, in my view, through their policies and pronouncements. They were coming over, and I began looking at what they called, one of the things I asked for from the Department of Health and Human Services were significant incident reports, SIRs, right? What these SIR reports involved were incidents of, abuse, medical problems, a whole range of issues involving these children. Anything that the agencies that were hired by the federal government to care for these children were seeing and had to report to HHS. It turned out that there were over 24,000 of these reports submitted to HHS in 2014. I had asked for a 6-month window, but even I couldn't look at half that number. That would be 12,000 reports. I just don't have time. So I reduced the scope of my request to just asking for incident reports involving abuse or assault, essentially. Even then, I got over 1,000 reports, and we were seeing everything. We were seeing, by the way, the reason we were looking at these records in 2018 was that it took HHS that many years to supply these records to me from 2014. Because we didn't litigate that case. I did not ask our legal department to litigate that particular case for me. And if you don't file a lawsuit against the government, they will drag these things out that long. Sometimes not even intentionally. They may be understaffed in some cases. The FOIA office at HHS, I think, is understaffed. So they've just got a big backlog of cases. So that may be part of it. They simply don't have the manpower. So it took them over 3 years at least to produce these records. But as it happened, the timing was very fortuitous for us because it was right around that time that President Trump was saying that there were murderers and rapists and drug traffickers and human traffickers coming across the border. These records showed exactly that the president was right on the money about that. These records showed, and I went through, as I say, over 1,000 of these things. These kids, these so-called kids, were admitting to having murdered people. They admitted to trafficking drugs. They admitted to rape. Many of the kids were raped. Girls were raped, and some boys en route to the United States or after they got to the United States. This was reported. Some of the girls were sent up here for prostitution purposes. The problem with the border is, and I would argue the need for a wall is that we are actually encouraging this sort of abuse of children when we have an open border, because their parents are going to try to send them north, in some cases alone, in the case of unaccompanied alien children. And I believe a third of these children, they've estimated, a third of the girls are sexually abused or assaulted on their trip north. And all we're doing by having a porous border is encouraging this kind of abuse. And there were, among those many reports were kids who admitted to being members of MS-13 or other gangs. In some cases, you had these so-called children admitting to having murdered multiple people. In one case, I recall a kid admitted to murdering 3 people. Now, naturally, I think in almost every case where they admitted to killing people, they said it was done on orders of the gang that they were in. They had no choice, which may or may not be true. We really have no way of knowing. But all of this, bore out the president's assertion that there are, in fact, murderers and rapists and drug traffickers and human traffickers coming across the border and gang members. And, this is it's an issue that, that's not going to go away soon. It's got to be dealt with. I mean, this is an issue that's causing major problems on the southwest border in particular. I really feel for the states of Texas and Arizona and New Mexico that are dealing with all of the this flow of humanity which is coming across. Most of these people, I'm sure, are hardworking people looking for a better life, but in that population, you're going to get some very, very bad people, and they need to be screened at the border.
Yeah. So that's, in essence, what this proves is that both UACs, just how much abuse there was. I remember reading some of the documents myself. There were some horror stories there.
Oh, yeah, there absolutely were. And the thing is that another issue that we see with these kids is that they're bringing diseases that we have not seen in the United States for years. And in fact, there's a polio-like, and this is in a separate investigation I did where I got records from CDC. The doctors at CDC were discussing how they were looking at a polio-like illness that they had not seen before, and it was among the population of these unaccompanied alien children that were being spread, that were being, resettled at different locations in the United States after they came across. One of the unfortunate aspects of the story, I did a story on this on the UACs about the murderers and rapists, the admitted murderers and rapists, and drug traffickers that were coming across. I did a story on this in July of 2018, and unfortunately, our story came out right after the Brett Kavanaugh nomination by the president, so it sort of got swamped. Our story, which I felt would have supported the president's argument, was buried in the news cycle by the Brett Kavanaugh coverage, but it's just the fortunes of
the way it works.
You can't really do anything about that.
So in conclusion, with all of these cases in 2018, where does Judicial Watch go from here with some of these cases which aren't quite done yet, and we don't exactly know everything that happened?
Yeah, I mean, if you had any idea how many stacks of records I've got, which I have yet to review, I mean, really great material relating to every imaginable issue. I mean, we just touched on a few of them. I'm looking at, problems with Somali refugees in Minneapolis. There's a huge daycare fraud problem going on among Somali daycare centers and other forms of welfare fraud going on. That's something else I'm looking at. It's another big issue that I think we're going to see in 2019 as I dive into that. We're expanding our research into George Soros' operations around the world. We're going to continue looking at the Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, love notes, communications. The legacy of the Obama administration is going to last many, many years in this country, and I'm sad to say it's going to have a deleterious impact in many ways on our society and our government going forward. And it's we're also looking, of course, at the Trump administration. There are various aspects of the Trump administration that we're looking at. He doesn't necessarily control, unfortunately, all the levers of power as he should, simply because we have, particularly the Justice Department, State Department, they're so embedded with Obama holdovers that he is having a hard time getting control of those organizations.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Bill. This has been a very enlightening conversation. Thank you for briefing our viewers on what's been going on in 2018.
Oh, thanks for having me back, Bruce. It was great.
Thank you for joining us on Inside Judicial Watch. Please be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, subscribe to us on YouTube, and be sure to donate if you appreciate our work here going forward in 2019. Thank you for joining us.